All right, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming down today, and yeah, I appreciate you all coming. A lot of you are here for the first time, so lower your expectations. Yeah, just a quick introduction. So my name is Foong. I'm the product manager here at data.gov. We don't own the whole office. This is open government products. It's essentially like, you can think of it as an incubator for government products, and data.gov is one of the many products that we have here. Some of our other products, maybe if you guys drive, maybe you are familiar with Parking SG, you might be familiar with Scam Shield, Active SG. So these are some of the other products that we have over here in the office. So yeah, my background, as mentioned, I started off doing data analytics and engineering in SF, so San Francisco. Did that for about 6 years, and then now I'm here. So yeah, leading product for data.gov, which is Singapore's open data portal. And then with me, I also have my eng lead, Yongjie.
Hi guys, nice to meet all of you. I'm Yongjie. I'm the engineering manager at data.gov.sg. So I started my career in OGP, so I have no previous company to speak of. But in the last 5 years at OGP, I've worked at GoGov.sg, which is the link shortener for the government, FormGov.sg, which is the form builder for the government. And when COVID struck, I was the architect for the health risk warning pipeline, which was is meant to have reliable and timely notifications for members of public who are at high risk of contracting COVID, just tell them to stay at home and monitor their health, right? And after that, that's when I started my foray into data products. I worked on Vault, which is an internal platform for data sharing in the government. And then a lot of other things also. I built a Presto cluster for OGP and a lender in data.gov, right? So similar to Foong, I think when we joined data.gov.sg about 1 or 2 years ago, we saw that there's a lot of untapped potential in the open data space within the government. A lot of them is hidden nooks and crannies, and we really want to bridge the gap between all of these open data and actual tangible benefits in many communities in Singapore, right? It's not just about researchers and their weather forecast models. It's about technical audiences like yourselves, students, who knows, maybe even non-technical people, yeah? So there's a lot of things that I'd like to share with our newest iteration in data.gov.sg, but for now, I'll return the mic to Foong to share a little bit more about other things. Right.
All right, so just start off with this. Government data is really hard to get. If any of you guys have worked in the government or work together with the government, you'll notice that people are quite skeptical and it's quite hard to convince people to give you their data. Even outside of the government, in like private sector companies, it is quite challenging to get data. So you can only imagine how much harder it is to do it in the government. And I'm not sure if all of you guys are familiar with Singapore government, but the general perception of government is that government is very slow, is not the most efficient, and so on. And this is especially compounded when you take something as complex as data. And there are a lot of reasons for this, right? It's not that people don't want to work with us, and maybe the slides are a little bit small, so I'll just explain some of this to you. So the first problem is that the data is very siloed and it's really hard to access, right? So for those of you guys who are working in companies today, even within your enterprise data warehouse, I'm sure there's also access control issues. Now, if you look at the government and you think of every single agency as its own company with their own data governance structure and their own data warehouses, and a lot of the times these are not even on the same systems, then you can imagine how complicated and how difficult it is for us to access the data. Even if we get access to the data verbally or in principle, they need to engage vendors because they have no idea how to do it themselves. And this takes a really long time and it costs a lot of money. And it is very challenging. And even after all of this, right, you engage a vendor delay, it takes a lot of time, a lot of money. Even after you've gotten access to the data, there's always this concern where like, what if we open source the data and then there's like public outcry or there's public backlash? So there's a lot of risk that, government agencies are taking to open sourcing the data. And it's not something that's very common, even in the private sector. So very much more so in the government. So when we first started out, and this was way before my time, in 2011, the premise was that the government does not have a monopoly on all the good ideas and the skills and the resources to do good in society. We might, I guess in Singapore it's maybe a little bit different. People do trust the government to some degree, but ultimately the government has access and the government has a lot of like very valuable data, but we don't have a monopoly on the skills and the resources to make value, to create value out of that data. So when we first started, it was really a thought experiment. What if we open source the data that government is currently sitting on, and let's just see what people are able to do with it and what kind of value that they can create. Since then, we have onboarded about 71 agencies at the moment. They're still not the entire government, even though we've been working on this for 13, 14 years. And a couple thousand data sets, but we're still looking to expand that even further. So some of you guys might ask, okay, you've talked a lot about government data, you said it's really hard to use and all of this, but actually what's the value, right? And I think the value is really to make it, to lower the barrier to entry to government data and really make it accessible for everyone, right? So I think as Yongxie has kind of alluded to, when we think about data, a lot of times we think about technical users. And I think a lot of you here, you are Python enthusiasts or people who are really skilled and have maybe a technical background. You might be a data analyst, engineer, or so on. And there is only one segment of the users that we think about, right? So these are the people who, you throw them an API, you show them some documentation, they can figure it out. But there's also a lot of other users who would love to use the data, but have no idea how to do it, right? So sometimes these are like researchers or policymakers who are very well-intentioned, but maybe they don't have the technical skills or they have very basic technical skills. So how do you help them do this? And even beyond that, right? Beyond your researchers, beyond your students and so on, there are members of public who would love to know more about, how the housing prices. They would love to know more about the dengue clusters around them. They would love to know more about the weather forecast. And they have no way to do it because they don't know how to query an API, right? Or they don't know how to like look at a CSV file and pass through it in Excel, as simple as it sounds, right? So how can we make that data accessible to all these different groups of people? So we essentially went through a major revamp. So for those of you who are first time looking at data.gov, this is not what it looked like in the past. In fact, I will give you kind of like a very quick snapshot of time where in the very beginning, and it's a bit small, so you can't really see, but in the beginning, it looked a little bit like this. And then over the years, we've kind of iterated and like made it a little bit nicer. But now we've really stripped away a lot of like the noise and tried to make like the data really accessible. And this really kind of like anchors on these three keywords, or like the three core premises of the data. So the first is we want to make sure that the data is discoverable. So first, people need to know that the data exists, and they must be able to search it, and they must be able to find a relevant piece of data, right? Once they have found the data set on the platform, they need to be able to very quickly understand the data, whether through visualizations, metadata, data dictionaries, or so on, really understand whether this data is actually relevant to them. And then once they have decided that this is relevant to them, they need to be able to use it, right? So whether it is an API, whether it is downloading a data set, or even like looking at a chart or map or visualization, there's also usage. All right, so I'll just very quickly cover some of the use cases that we have. So I think, as I kind of alluded to, you have your real estate people who care a lot about public housing, public transactions. So your Property Guru, 99Co, Business Times, they use like the data on data.gov. So these are like your public housing prices, your rentals, property information, even things like location and facing and like number of stories and all of these things. Like that is important information for people to have. We also have like business registry data. So this is being used by a couple of the banks as well as like insurance companies to do like KYC, to do like business registry locations. We are also talking to folks from overseas. So people like Nikkei, the Japanese newspaper, and then also like some of the folks from UK and Canada. And then finally, we also have weather forecasts. So that's very, very heavily used by our media agencies. So CNN uses our weather forecast. We have Straits Times, CNA, and so on. So every time you open up one of those newspapers and you look at Singapore's weather forecast, it's probably pulling from data.gov's APIs. And a very funny story here. So we do see a whole range of use cases. So a funny anecdote is like we found out the other day that that we have a user who uses our weather forecast to determine when to like hang his clothes. So you can see like there's really a wide spectrum. You have your enterprise users, and then you have your members of public who are using it for whatever they are doing. And today we have Cliff, who's here to share with us one of his use cases as well. Do you want to very quickly walk through?
Test. Okay, so my name is Cliff, and you all can tell I'm not from the government. And in fact, I think I would ask like any engineers here. Okay, I should ask who is not an engineer, because technically I'm not an engineer. I actually graduated from econs, not like data analyst, right? We just want to like use Python and whatever. So I did analysis using the data.gov HDB dataset. I won't go too much in detail, but the general idea is that I got a bit sick with the idea of million-dollar homes in Singapore. And for people who are a bit more data-centric, right, you realize that actually what I have here is a distribution, box plot distribution, which doesn't really focus on just one particular point. And okay, I won't go too much into this. And you can see I tried to create more analysis to kind of get me away from the million-dollar things again. But I was also interested to understand things like proportion, percentages, and things like that. I can go to here. Okay. This is the scary thing. Okay, it's a bit small, so I'll walk through the data. So I took data from 2020 January. And if you all remember, it was a very painful time of humanity, I guess. Yeah, but since then, life has been getting even worse for Singaporeans, I guess. Yeah, so again, right, I think this is interesting. Like, we're looking at percentages. This is, I think, below 1%. And you guys can see, right, previously my benchmark was 1.5. That was like a while ago. I didn't really update my graph because I had to hard code it in. I kind of forgot it, but yeah, it's like now it's like about 4%-ish. Yeah. To the layman, just means that for every 100 public homes sold on the market for that month, about 4 of them are almost 5 are million-dollar homes, as compared to in the past, and the past just 4 years ago. And I think this kind of echoes what Foong is saying, right? Like, currently I'm still here, even though I'm saying stuff that's a bit like, yeah, iffy. And I kind of like trust that the team is like, yeah, it allows us to do analysis based on what we see. And of course, I have my code like in open repository, even though it's a very ugly code. But yeah, so again, I feel that for people who are keen on looking at data, I think data.gov.sg has a lot of interesting data sets that you guys can play with. For anybody wanting to like just learn, you can even download CSV files. For those that are a bit more comfortable, you can just use like request the package using Python. So yeah, I think it's really quite an interesting data set. I won't go, okay, one thing that I want to share so that it doesn't feel like so anti-government. So beyond just million-dollar homes, right, I also look at proportions. It's a bit small again, but basically the blue ones, right, let me forget my data. Oh, okay. The dark blue and the blue ones are those that are 500,000 and below. So you can see that actually it's kind of like dropping down again as well. But it's kind of stabilizing, I hope. Yeah. But and for me, is again, when I was doing this thing, right, eventually I got it out on Fast API and stuff like that. But initially I was like, yeah, it actually kind of got me a bit less stressed about million-dollar homes again. In that sense that I felt that it was an interesting thing. I'm actually still doing daily API calls using the GitHub Actions. So you can see that I actually do have it like 21st, I think today's 21st, right? Yeah, correct. Yeah, so I just let it run. So once in a while, I come and see, and if anybody's interested, can go and see as well. So again, it's just kind of use case that I think it's interesting to me at least. Anybody who's interested in that Singapore housing market might be interested in this. Yeah, and that's my little sharing. I'm sure there's a lot more interesting use cases out there. I'm just the one that knows Foong, so Foong asked me to share. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Cliff. Yeah, so I mean, that's just one of the many use cases that we have had, and I think most of you guys would probably agree that price transparency is quite important, even if it maybe paints a quite futile future for us, but it really helps, right? And we can see this being used by property agents who are using this data. I've seen like some of our charts appear when I try to go and buy a house, and then a property agent is like trying to show me a chart that I was working on the previous day. So it's quite cool. Cool. Yes, these are some of our metrics. We do publish this openly as well. So if you guys are interested, you can see, how much money it costs, how many API calls are being made, and all of these things. This is all public information. And yeah, So now I'll just very quickly go through the demo, which I think most of you, what most of you guys are here for. So let me just share my screen. Cool. And you guys can come to this yourselves as well. Yeah, just data.gov.sg in case anyone's wondering. So yeah, so when you come to the page, it's actually quite simple. You can see like there's really just one call to action, which is in the middle of the page, which is the search bar. So the reason why we did this, it looks quite simple and intuitive on hindsight, but we really looked into the data and the users' data when we decided like to revamp the site. So the first thing that we did was we looked at the data. We saw like how many people were making a search and how many people were doing exploration, and we realized like okay, maybe about 70% of the users already knew what they wanted. They just wanted to search. So that's why we put the search bar in the middle. And then the other like 30%, a lot of them are a lot more exploratory. So out of that 30%, about 15%, 10 to 15% are already clicking on the topics. So they want to do exploration via like domains and topics. And then beyond this is really like the last 15% of people, right? So how do we try to capture them? We try to provide like a bit more information. We try to give them like some features to play around with, to really like try to see if we can inspire them. And one of the most interesting things that we're trying to work on now is the public creations, right? So here, what we're trying to do is showcase some of the public creations using the data that exists on data.gov. So here you can see like Straits Times, Continentalist, Property Guru, and so on. But we really want to expand this section. So we're working with a couple of companies to like build up the case studies over here and really like showcase the data sets. And I think there's like two parts to this. One is about inspiring people to see like, okay, there's actual value on this data set and really like building that social proof and that credibility, right? If let's say CNN is using this data, then I can probably use this data in production as well. And then the second thing is really to celebrate the data community, right? So there's a lot of good work that people are doing, and like what Cliff is doing, a lot of this actually goes quite unnoticed, and there's not a lot of forums to celebrate some of these data projects. And I think a lot of you guys here are working on data projects very similar to whatever Cliff is doing. Maybe it's a bit nicer, maybe it's better, I don't know, right? But there's a lot of projects out there, and I think there's a lot of good work that's being done that I think we can really try to celebrate a little bit better. And this is like one of the forums that we're trying to create to showcase what people have done. And then in that way, also like allow people to connect with one another. So if let's say next time when you go to the HDB data set and then you see, oh, Cliff has worked on this and this is a link to his project, then you can just talk to him and ask him some questions. You all can work together and collaborate. And then in that way, I think we're hoping within our product, we can build like a better like communication and like data community from there. All right, so enough of like the sales talk. I'll let Yongjie talk about like some of the details around like the engineering that went behind this, including our search and also like how we deal with some of the different data formats.
All right, thanks, Foong. Yeah, so as Foong has mentioned, I'll be very quickly talking to you about the dataset detail experience. That will be the main way that you'll be consuming datasets in DGS, yeah, data.gov.sg. So there are three kinds of datasets in data.gov right now. There is the tabular datasets, and then second, we have the geospatial datasets, and lastly, real-time datasets. I'll be going through all three of these one by one. So for the tabular datasets, I can very quickly just search like, resale flat prices. This is something that I think we know everyone is very interested about. So yeah, you'll be presented with a view that is not too unfamiliar, right? Beyond just the title and description of the data set, I want to bring everyone's attention to the data viewer part. So it is not too different from the Kaggle experience. The spirit is the same, right? We know that we have a technical audience here, and we would love to analyze the data ourselves on our computers, but there's still value in being able to have a cursory glance at the data set to figure out if this is your data set, whether it's something that you can derive value from. So at the first row of this viewer, it's not really a data row, it's really a summary statistics row, right? It gives you a sense of the kind of values and the relative frequencies. Not sure if it's easy to see of each column here. This already gives you a rough sense of what you can expect in this data set. And also the null percentage, right? This is a rough proxy on the data quality of a data set. So below here, we have the column legends. This is like all of the metadata for each tabular data set. To be honest, you'll be quite lucky to have proper values here. I would shamefully admit that data quality is the hardest job, the hardest part of our job here. It's not really about the engineering, but really is to cajole agencies and their admins to first give us data, secondly, give us data in a way that is usable, right? And so please understand if you see or if you encounter data sets that the data type is just all text, right? It will pass validation very easily in our pipeline, but then it will not be a good experience for you. We are working on this. We will probably be forever working on this lah. Yeah. So so once you have decided that this data set is the right one for you, right? You want to use this. There are two main ways you can consume this data set. So firstly, we encourage people to just download the CSV file, do whatever you want with it. But there are some transactional use cases where you want to make API calls to find specific roles for whatever applications that you're building. So for that, we actually have code snippets for you, right? It's currently hidden at this corner over here. You can see Python code for you to immediately copy and run, right? Within 5 to 10 seconds, you can already use it. Interestingly, if you only care about a few columns, right? If I only want the month and flat type, if I apply the filter over here and then I generate the snippet again, it's actually it corresponds to the columns that you have selected. So we're hoping to really reduce the time needed for you to integrate with us. Yep. And so one extra thing that we've just launched and we are trying out is this collab feature here. The idea is that so you can just copy the dataset ID and then open this in Google Colab. And you can literally just paste the dataset here, run, right? This is effectively a notebook that you can run. Within less than 30 seconds, you should have all the data in a data frame and then explore it, right? Do whatever you want with it. So definitely let us know if this is useful for you and what else we can do to improve your experience. Going back to the page here. Okay, yeah, so below here, it's an open API query. It's just how you can consume the data set programmatically with a lot more fine-grained details. You will have to consult the documentation. So we do prefer if you can just use the code snippet at the top here, right, for your first try. So below this is really about just who you can complain to if there's problems, right? The owner of the dataset, the agency, the contact email. And then another, we'll have the dataset usage metrics. This can also be a proxy for how useful the dataset is. The more usage it has, chances are it's pretty useful for you as well. Yep. So that's all for the tabular datasets. I'll very quickly make a passing statement is that there are some datasets that do have visualizations. We are working on this at the moment with agencies to, give me one sec. Yeah, to just allow non-technical audiences to be able to consume the data in like non-technical ways, like just viewing visualizations. So you might encounter some of these as well. Once again, work in progress. We are hoping to expand the selection of data sets that have visualizations. Yeah. So moving on, we'll be talking about the geospatial data sets. So another topic that people recently care a lot about is the dengue clusters. And so this is an example of a geospatial data set. Give me one second. Okay, yeah, so this is the dataset detail page for geospatial datasets. It is quite bare bones at the moment, we admit. If you click into a boundary, all you can see, it zooms into the boundary and then you can see metadata on the right side. Below that, you can also have a preview of the actual data inside. So if this is a GeoJSON file, you see JSON. So admittedly, that's all, and we know that we can do better. We are trying to figure out what better looks like, right? And so definitely let us know what, if you have any opinions or thoughts on how we can improve this. We do have some guesses and we have a prototype of some sorts with the electoral boundaries dataset. So this is about the elections that's coming soon here in 2024, 2025. So if you see electoral boundaries, yeah, so this is the boundaries that's provided by ELD. It's kind of bad, to be honest, right? If you click into the boundaries, there's no metadata on the right side. Like you don't even know what to do with it. So we are trying to improve on this right now. We have a microsite prototype, which is over here. It's currently in staging, but then we're trying to envision what good looks like in our flavor, right? So the idea is that, yes, there's a lot of open data that the elections department has, they don't always give it to us, but we can just scrape it from them and like visualize it in a way that's a lot usable, right? So example, right, you can see visually it already looks a lot better, but then there's also a lot of data that you don't see in the data set that I showed earlier, right? So winning margin, yes, but look at the boundaries also, right? You can even click into, for example, Pasir Ris and notice that how the boundaries shrink and expand with time, right? You can observe and make whatever conclusions you want about all of this, right? Yeah, so just a very brief, short demo of like what we have in mind. Hopefully we help to productionize this and put this back into the main site. But once again, feedback is really appreciated here. We are constantly iterating on this. So that's for the geospatial datasets. So last is the real-time datasets. So real-time datasets are those that are mostly only valuable if they are timely, right? So for example, weather. If I very quickly just search weather over here. Example, if you want to know about wind speed, right? So you come across this like Swagger-like interface. We used to use like a Swagger viewer, but we've modified the interface to look more consistent with the rest of the site. But it's not too different, right? You can see the query parameters, what you can, like what we expect from you in terms of the queries, the dates and whatnot. And then you can also see very simple examples like on what the data you can expect. We have this Postman-like interface over here. You don't even need to send any queries. When you click the send button, we'll give you the most latest data by default, because that's usually what's most important. And so it is, yeah, it's around 7:56, and the data is like from as of 7:54. So it's real. It's not it's not fake time, right? But it's real enough time, right? So yeah, going back to the dataset detail page, and then you can also see the response here. If you can click and expand, and you can roughly guess what to expect, right? So that's all for all of the 3 types of datasets. I will return the mic to Foong for the rest of the presentation.
All right. Yeah, believe it or not, this is the first time Yong Jie is presenting to such a big audience. So let's give him another hand. Before we move on, do anyone have any questions? I know we went through a lot of content and you guys are probably like trying to spam the site now. But do anyone has questions? It's not new. It's visualized in a new way. So previously we had it on the platform, but unfortunately there were like some breaking changes and it wasn't being visualized very well. So we recently made the decision to change our visualization library to Mapbox, and then also add like some of the metadata visualization on the site as well. Change the way it's previewed, yeah, to on the UI. And also the way you query it. So I think Yong Jie might have skipped over this part, but we also have an object API. So people can download essentially those object files programmatically instead of having to manually download the GeoJSON. Yeah. Sorry, one more question? Yeah. So the question was, for the data catalog, do we use any framework or do we build from scratch?
By catalog, what do we do? This dot. Yeah, so referring to the backend, like what powers the search, right? Yeah, we used to use OpenSearch, which is like an Elasticsearch fork, but then we've recently moved to TypeSense. Yeah, because it gives a lot more out of the box, like semantic search is a lot easier to implement there. Yeah.
So we have very generous rate limits. So really the only people who get rate limited are people who try to DOS us. But in general, like I think going back to the principle of like open data, we try not to limit people who are using us extensively. And if you are using us really extensively, you might get an email from me and then I'll be like, hey, what's going on here? Yeah. But most of the times it doesn't really happen. Even for like our biggest, like CNN is our biggest user, at like one of our biggest users. I think they query us like 50,000 times a day or something like that, and it's fine. Yeah. So
Yeah, so we are, oh, sorry, just to add on for Fong first. Yeah, so we are being deliberately ambiguous here. But then, yeah, so we're just trying to be generous and just definitely let us know in advance if you have any production workloads, but we do want to support as much as possible. I mean, we've always had some thoughts about like having a lower rate limit for anonymous users and then gating the higher QPS endpoints by registration or authentication, right? But then we eventually realized that the effort needed to implement that was way more than the effort we spent to actually ensure that the site isn't being abused. It was quite simple. We just blocked Russia and China, and then it's okay already. So currently that's enough, right? But yeah, yeah.
I can cover very high level. Yeah. So okay. So we're mainly on AWS. So for our object storage, we use S3. For our databases, we use DynamoDB and Postgres. So Dynamo for like when people are uploading the data and it's like not so structured yet, and then like Postgres for our tabular and structured data. So all the APIs that we're talking about, essentially these are like DB queries, right? So it's very DB-like. You can filter, you can sort, and all these things. Yeah, and then our search we use TypeSense. TypeSense. Um, yeah, is there more to that? Okay, perfect. And sorry, one more question in the back. Yeah, so just to repeat the question, I think so. It's a product management question. I'm trying to recall now. It's a product management question, and the question was there's a lot of like exploratory data exploratory tools or EDA tools that you can use out there that we don't have at the moment. And then the question was whether we probably won't build one ourselves because it's too expensive and it takes too much time. So have we considered like referring existing tools or open source tools out there? It's a good question. I think we have taken this a couple of ways, and we haven't come to a decision yet. So the first way is really like doubling down on our data visualizations. So our charts today are quite rudimentary. So we have like bar charts, line charts, very simple data visualizations. The way that we can expand on that is like give users a little bit more control to do like user-generated charts, right? So can they like plot, just pull in like an x-axis and a y-axis and then like see what the trends are and just do some very basic explorations. I think the current thinking is that for very serious data visualizations, these are normally going to be done by maybe more skilled practitioners who have their own preferred tech stacks and their own preferred tools. So our focus is more on like, can we distribute the data easily first? And then we assume that people will take it and consume it. What we're starting to notice is that perhaps that hypothesis is not always true. So for example, when we work with media agencies, you would assume that your Straits Times and your CNAs and your CNNs and Bloombergs of the world, that they are very well-resourced and very strong in data visualizations. And some of them are. They do have dedicated data visualization teams or teams who can actually take the data and do something with it, but they're also very stretched. So when you think about media agencies, they're running stories all the time and everyone wants to have like a nice visual. So how can we like help them to like cut down some of this time? And that's something that we are thinking about. And some of our explorations is like, okay, how can we allow people to then embed some of the visualizations that we have, or even embed like this data table over here, which I think just went to production this morning. So, so yeah, it's really like what we're thinking about right now. And I don't think we've fully solved it. So yeah, I think we're open to suggestions as well. Yes, two more questions. Yeah, it's a really good question. So just to repeat it, like data sensitivity and classification is always a big challenge. Do we sanitize the data on our side, or does it come from the source agencies? So I think Yongjie mentioned in the past we had we used to work, or he used to work on the internal data sharing platform. So in that situation, it was a lot more complicated in the sense that we had to provide these capabilities out of the box. So we had a way for people to mask the data or anonymize the data, especially if you think about, some of these data sets are really sensitive. Things like criminal records, things like CPF balances, all of these information, really, really sensitive stuff. You don't want that to leak. So we had to provide a lot of anonymization. The challenge with anonymization is that there's a lot of ways. There's always someone who's better than you at it, and that person is probably not on your team. So, and what that means is people can always even if you come up with an algorithm to anonymize your data, there's always a way to statistically unmask that data, even if they don't have access to it. Or they could get a separate data set that doesn't contain any of your data, but then they could try to match and do some kind of pattern matching and unmask it. So it's actually a really, really difficult problem to solve, and it's a really expensive problem, and there's a lot of way smarter people who are working on it. The good thing is on the public side, we don't have to do it. So we work with the data agencies to really understand the data, anonymize the data, and summarize it ahead of time, so that when it's published, as much as possible, it's not identifiable. Yeah. Yes. Maybe at the back. So the question was, how many, what's the percentage or proportion of data that you get from the source, and how much do we get scraping? It's a good question. I don't have a number for you, but I would say that it's probably there's a much higher percentage that's getting scraped. And the reason for this is because there are some data platforms that we integrate directly with. So it's technically not scraping. So we ask for permission and then we talk to them and then they give us API access and then we query the data from them and then we re-upload it on our side. So the thinking here is that data.gov is the discovery platform. So it's kind of you go to Google to find a website, right? We don't claim to be experts in the data. We're not domain experts, but we are the data platform that allows you to find these data sets and really do your discovery work, really understand the data and dive deep into the data. And even in some cases, getting access to the data as well. But if you want to do, really complex business logic on it, or you want to do partnerships, that's when we'll rope in the source agencies as well. And I think that's a very big part of this partnership. So I know Yongjie was talking a little bit about the problems, but really it's a celebration of the work that a lot of these government agencies have done. They spend a lot of time collecting the data, cleaning the data, making sure it's machine readable and all of this. So what we really want to do is make sure that they also get some level of benefit from open sourcing the data, right? And that's the incentive mechanisms that we have to build into the platform. So attributing the work back to them, doing citations, giving them the metrics, giving them visibility of who's using the data. So it's actually a really close partnership that we're trying to drive with the agencies. And I think the challenge here is every agency has a little bit of a different risk appetite. So some of them, they're you can just scrape the data, and then some of them, they're really willing to work with us. So I think on our side, what we try to do is we're first trying to make their data accessible so that people can start using it. Once we see that it's really valuable, then we can accrue the value back to the data producers. And then in that way, once they start to see that, hey, it's not that scary, I can open source my data, people are using it, they're getting value, and I'm contributing to society and I'm getting credit for it, then we can start to change people's mindsets, right? We can go to agencies and say, hey, people are doing this, there's this positive press coverage, people are looking at your prices and all of these things. And then slowly over time, we can, convince them to change their mindsets around open source data. All right, I know there are a lot of more questions. We'll be happy to take them after the session. But just looking at time, I'll just very quickly speak through some of our final slides. So I think we talked a little bit about what we're going to do next. So we're investing a lot into our geospatial data sets. We are onboarding new real-time APIs. So we're working with NEA for like lightning data and lightning forecasts, and then also like WBGT, which is another way to like measure temperature. We talked about user charts. So how can we like help people visualize their data, citations, and then also elections. Yeah, and I think the final thing we wanted to really highlight is like the way we change the mindset of the government is to show that people are able to use the data. And I think this, I cannot like emphasize this more. And I think it's really important that the data community like is able to showcase their work and showcase the value of like leveraging government data. And I think that's something that we're really trying to push to like change opinions in the government. So I think we'll be super happy to work with you guys if any of you are interested to work on like to use like the government data or any of the data on data.gov. And if you're too shy, like that's fine as well. You can just use it for free. That's fine. Yeah. So if you guys want to partner with us, we do have like a link here that you can kind of scan, and then it'll direct you to a form. Yeah, then you can leave us your contact details. You can shoot us a message, and we'll be happy to like discuss like potential projects and ideas. And if you've already built something even better, you can just share us a link. And we're working on expanding the use case section, so hopefully we should be able to feature it soon. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And the last thing, I know I'm going quite salesy, but we also have a Telegram channel. This is for us to like give updates to you guys for like new features, for you guys to ask questions, for you guys to engage with us. So yeah, we're on Telegram as well. All right, thank you everyone, and thank you so much for coming down.